When a family member, friend, colleague has lost a loved one and is in grief, it can be hard to know what to say. You don't want them to take what you say the wrong way and get offended, but you're also not comfortable in dealing with their heavy feelings. You might not even know if it's appropriate to acknowledge the death. Before we start, a heads up that we post death and dying related videos every Friday. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, consider subscribing to the channel. And now, let's talk what not to say to a grieving person. Before we begin, remember what you say depends on how you know the person, who the dead person was to them, and the particular situation or location that this conversation takes place in. For example, right before you walk into a work meeting is the wrong place. With this in mind, let's begin. How are you doing? This is right up there with how you're going when you walk into work the first thing in the morning to greet your co-workers. You don't actually care, it's more of a habit and just being polite. Everyone knows this, so they just reply good or fine. And it's the same thing when you see someone who's just experienced a loss and you say, "I'm sorry for your loss, how are you doing?" One, it sounds like you don't actually care, and quite frankly, you probably don't, or at least you don't want to have a deep conversation about their feelings. Two, habit will just make them say, "I'm fine." And three, they have probably been asked this multiple times for multiple days since the loss, and it gets irritating quite quickly. Just end the sentence with, "I'm sorry for your loss." They're in a better place. A classic, which is actually very insulting. This is one of those go-to lines that you just say and expect them to gloss over. But unless this person is extremely religious in some way and actually believes in a better afterlife, this is such an arsehole thing to say. Because how it sounds to a non-religious grieving person is anywhere is better for them than with you. So don't be surprised if they tell you to get lost with a bit more swearing involved. And cue the, "Oh my God, they're just so sensitive," or "I was just trying to help." Yeah, sure Karen, sure. I understand what you're going through. This is one of those things that in the very first unit of any psych course, you will be told to never say to a client. For the same reason, you shouldn't say it to a grieving person. One, you don't know what they're feeling or going through, even if you have gone through a similar loss, because you don't have their personality, their background, their relationship with that person, all things that impact how they are feeling and coping. And two, while you think it's a comforting thing to say, it actually makes the situation about you, which isn't cool. Everything happens for a reason. This is another, "I don't know what to say, but this sounds alright" kind of thing. How does this help the grieving person? This is asking the person to look on the bright side, see the silver lining, and usually that's just to make you feel more comfortable. This kind of statement glosses over the depth and complexity of a person's grief. Time heals all wounds. No, it doesn't. You know what can also happen to wounds instead of healing? They go gangrenous and your legs fall off, or you get sepsis and you die. So no, grief doesn't necessarily get better with time, and it certainly isn't going to get better when everyone around keeps saying shit like that. Grief can turn into complicated grief, which often leads to suicide, kind of the mental health version of sepsis. And if you don't know what complicated grief entails, go back and look at our types of grief video. Death happens to all of us eventually. You know when people, usually young people, discover a new concept and they go overboard with it, take it to extremes and tell everyone what they should think before finally dialing it back to an acceptable level? Well, the death acceptance crowd has its version of those insufferable people on occasion as well. And this is where I tell those people to go back and watch our death acceptance myths video to remind them that grief affects us just as much, no matter if you acknowledge that death happens to everyone eventually or not. So get off your little soapbox and try being an empathetic person. "You're handling this better than expected." This is one of those lines that people say to the bereaved at a funeral. The bereaved is often trying to put on a brave face, often to not draw attention to themselves and to just get through it. You saying this reinforces that they should be trying to hide their grief. And depending on the tone, it can also be extremely passive-aggressive, as if to say, "Well, your husband's dead and you're not crying enough. How big was that life insurance policy?" At least they lived full life. This may very well be true if they lived into their 80s and 90s, but that doesn't make the loss of someone's beloved parent any easier. It is again a look at the silver lining kind of thing that glosses over someone's pain, particularly if it's only been a week. You're still young, you can find another husband. Many years ago, a cousin of mine went to a funeral of his best mate who died in his early 30s. And that statement is what one of the old gals said to the widow. And then I started working in grief counselling, and it became clear that this statement is said way more than it should be, and usually by the much older generation. I shouldn't have to explain why this is inappropriate, so just take my word for it. It is, and you are risking having your nose broken by saying so. It's a blessing you have other children, or you're young enough to have another child. Much like the last one, this comes from people who really can't read a room and is usually said to the parent, or more so the mother, after their child has died. Now, I'm not really sure what these people think they are accomplishing by saying this, but from what I've heard, they get really offended when you tell them it's inappropriate and ask them to leave. It's been a while now, aren't you over them yet? Many people seem to forget that grief doesn't just last between the day the person dies and their funeral. Depending on who the deceased was to them, it can go on for years. You don't just get over it, you learn to cope, to get by. The pain may lessen, but you carry that person and their departure forever. Now, living with someone who is grieving long term is difficult, yes. So let me point out two things. One, grief doesn't just magically disappear. And if you're saying this within 6 months or so of the death, you're out of line and they're going through a natural process. Two, if it's been longer than 6 months and they are still feeling intense grief and are unable to function, don't just tell them to get over it. Help them seek out professional help. And get some for yourself too, because you sound like an ass. Don't avoid them. People often use platitudes or bumper sticker statements when they don't know what to say or are uncomfortable or feel like they should be giving advice. These statements might make you feel less uncomfortable by giving you something to fill the silence with, but they do nothing to help the individual who's grieving. But many people don't even do that. Many people who lose a loved one, particularly if it was in a traumatic way, often find family members, friends, colleagues try to avoid them. They notice people clearing a room when they walk in or cross the road when they see them walk by. And most of the time, they aren't imagining this. People actually do this. You'll be surprised just how many people go radio silent and not even bother to pick up the phone and call the bereaved because they find it hard. We said this in our video about terminal illness diagnosis and how those who are diagnosed are often abandoned by those they thought cared about them. And it's the same in this situation. You really find out who your real friends and loved ones are in this situation. Moral of the story, suck it up, princess. Simply saying my condolences for your loss is not that difficult. It's 5 little words. I think you can do it. What can you say? Okay, so now you're thinking, well, shit, what am I supposed to say to them? Never fear, I wouldn't leave you hanging. So try something like this. I'm sorry for your loss. I wish I had the right words. Please know I care and I'm here for you. You and your loved ones are in my prayers. Okay, so not good if they're an atheist, but if they're religious, it's okay. I can't imagine how you feel. Then be quiet and let them tell you how they feel. I can't imagine how you feel. When I lost my father, I felt, insert short statement. Then listen without judgment or criticism. Notice the difference in wording from I understand how you feel. I'm here for you. Better yet, if there is something specific they need, ask them if you can do it for them. Ask them if you can make phone calls or send emails on their behalf. Don't ask what they need or what you need done because that's a lot of choice and they will just close down. See a need and ask if you can action that need for them. Can I go to the funeral? For some people, the invite is implied, like close family and friends, but some would like to show their support by attending the funeral, so it's okay to ask if you're a close colleague. Want to talk about what happened? Many people avoid this question, but it helps the griever to explain it if they desire, and having a compassionate ear can help them process it more accurately. This is different from how are you doing? Just make sure that your timing is appropriate and you actually have time to talk if they want. In general, just be present and empathetic. And importantly, keep connecting with them. Many people are inundated with support and condolences in the first few weeks, but they really need support long after the funeral when the reality has really sunk in. And also, show your support through actions. Now, this depends on your relationship with them, obviously, but deliver them homemade meal, take their kids to school, help with the laundry, babysit their kids while they're going to grief counselling, take them out for coffee. Hell, help them brush their hair if they haven't gotten out of bed in a week. Also, and this one's kind of for the blokes, I know the let's get our mate out of the house and take them down to the pub for a drink is usually the go-to thing. And this is okay if it's a once-off combined with other supportive ideas. But remember, if their stress is really high, the alcohol is going to hit them harder. So it is your job to make sure that doesn't happen. Be responsible for your mate. So I do hope this was helpful. It's always good to have some ideas in your back pocket just in case you need them. If you learned something new, please give us a like and consider subscribing. And now, go talk death.